Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the T.H.O. Movie Reviews podcast, the show where we bring you passionate, honest, and insightful film criticism. I'm your host, Bennett Campbell Ferguson. I'm here at Market of Choice on Belmont in Portland, Oregon, once again to talk about Blade Runner 2049. And to do that, I've got two of my wonderful colleagues, starting with Hanna McGrath-Perdue, who's joining us for the first time. Hanna, welcome, and how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm excited to be here for my first podcast with you guys and to talk about Blade Runner, so thank you.
No, thank you. I'm so pumped to dig into this movie with you. And also, we have returning Patrick Belin. Patrick, how are you?
Hey, it's me again, being difficult as always. Not intentionally, but there you go.
Difficult critics are some of the best kind. I think we should say at this point that Patrick brought a prop. I'll post a picture of it on Facebook, but it is, appropriately enough, a toy wooden horse. So I don't know what date's on the bottom, but I think it's very much in the spirit of the movie.
I should scratch a date on the bottom of that.
What was it? 6 something 20.
10, 16, 21.
10, 16, 21.
Maybe I made that up. I don't know.
All right. Well, let's get into the movie. Since we did another podcast before where we with the rest of our team where we started at the beginning, for this one I want to start with both of you with the ending because it's
that's an appropriate place to start.
It's quite an ending. I think it says a lot about the whole film. So I was wondering if you could both briefly tell me what you thought of the movie overall, and also how you felt about the ending and how you think that it sort of further explores the ongoing Blade Runner question, which is, I think, what is humanity? How do we define humanity? What does that word even mean? So Hanna, what did you think of the film and how it ended?
I'm a huge fan of the original, and I recently rewatched it, and I love the kind of merging of genres and the influence of noir into sci-fi. And this film, I don't feel like did that very much, and I wasn't a huge fan. I know it's kind of polarizing right now how many people either seem to love or hate it. No one seems to be kind of in the gray area.
Yeah.
But I struggled a little bit with the structure and the way they used mystery, because him solving the mystery, Harrison Ford in the first movie, is such a huge part of it. And in this, it felt like, I don't know, I didn't know if I loved how the mystery kind of unfolded. And so when you were looking at humanity and kind of the ending, I wasn't sure that I felt like it explored it the way it was intending to. I didn't feel a ton of humanity from Ryan Gosling. I felt more humanity from Harrison Ford. And so at the end, I was a little, I was a little, not underwhelmed, but I wasn't sure that I saw kind of him lying there in the snow in the way that it was intended to be.
Sure. What do you think it was intended to be?
I think so. Well, I guess I would ask the question back to you. Is it up in the air whether he is dead or alive, or how did you interpret that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's such an important point, and I sort of assumed he was dead, and then after that I saw that there was some question, and I think it was one of the writers. It was either Hampton Fancher or Michael Green said, no, he's dead, but I mean. I always, only give the creator's opinion as much credence as I would give any viewers. So, I mean, I believe he dies because I feel like that makes sense in the context of his character arc. But then again, we don't necessarily see him die per se. So, I think you could make that argument that he didn't.
If their argument is that the most human thing you could do is to die for what is right or what you believe in, and it's ambiguous at the end whether he dies or not, it kind of has it kind of plays into the ambiguity of what humanity is in what I thought they did in this film. I thought the first film was a lot better at kind of exploring what is human and what makes a human, and this, if you're going to end like that, it kind of keeps the ambiguity, I felt like.
Can I interrupt here for a sec? It's already been a week since I saw the film, and I'm not sure that I'm following with the conversation. We're talking about the end scene, and you guys are talking about whether Kay died or not.
Yes.
What remind me and our audience, what was it in the visuals that indicated that Kay might have died?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, for one thing, I think we see him get stabbed like a couple times when he fights Love, and then in the very last scene, you see like the gaping wound
and chunks at that point, not just blood. He had like chunks of stuff all over.
Right, not just like a prick in the arm like Dave Bautista gave in the first scene. So and so I assumed that like kind of this sort of like he finds out he's not the child. He feels like his existence has no meaning, and so he sort of decides to give it meaning by sacrificing himself. That was my interpretation.
Okay, so on that alone, I would have to guess that he did not die. I don't feel that that's enough to kill a replicant. So that's where I'm going with that.
Gotcha. Well, Patrick, I mean, you've already nodded to it, but what did you think of the film overall?
Generally?
The ending, yeah.
I fucking loved it. I walked out of there with an overwhelming... I use the 4-star scale. I went out with an overwhelming 4 stars, and if I could give it 5, I would give it 5.
Like in The Guardian, basically.
But this is the first time I've seen it, so I guess I was seduced by the visuals and the sound, which I thought were tremendous. Some of the best visuals and sounds I've seen in a while. But if you want to really know how I feel about it, I would say it's the best sci-fi that I've seen since Arrival. It's my favorite sci-fi since Interstellar, and it's probably the best dystopian movie I've seen since Children of Men. So that's how I feel about it.
And what did
and I really want to see it again.
Nice. Well, and you don't think Kay dies? How do you?
I don't think Kay dies. I thought the ending was appropriate because this is Kay's story. This is no longer about Tyrell. This is no longer about Deckard. It's not about Rachel. It's about Kay.
Sure.
Pure and simple. So I thought the ending was very appropriate, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I think he dies. I think because I feel that that's sort of where his character arc leads him, and that's like kind of his, I'm probably repeating myself now, but kind of like how he, after feeling that I'm not the child, my romance with a hologram was just a sham, I feel that like kind of he goes into that fight, accepting that he's going to die. But I did love the movie, and I was also very much taken in by the visuals, but also the story. Like I think it's kind of interesting. Like one of the things I love about the first one is that ambiguity. Is Deckard a replicant or not? And I never wanted to see that question answered because I thought the point of there being a question was that the line between the real and the artificial is very thin, and what better way to illustrate that than to have a hero who is right in the middle, blurring that line even further. And so since that was what made the first film work, I like that there was a little bit of a different direction with this one, which is that Kay, even though there's the question of is he the child of Deckard and Rachel, he knows from the beginning who and what he is. He knows he's a replicant, and I thought that was so it was so interesting to see what it's like to like walk through the halls and have someone call you a tinplate soldier and say fuck off skin job like I can and so I thought like unlike the first one, which was sort of like a kind of a surrealist mystery, like kind of blurring the line between the human and the robotic. This I really felt was sort of a Pinocchio type story, you know, or even like
bit.
I thought about the Wizard of Oz and the Tin Man, you know, wanting to have a heart, you know, and so I thought that's what got me invested in it.
What made me want to give this movie 5 stars is that despite what's going on with the plot, the visuals, and anything that comes along with movie making, I thought the main star here was the philosophical questioning that you only really get from reading a lot of older books. You know, you don't really get this so much in movies these days, where a lot of movies just kind of want to entertain you. With this one, it actively engaged me into the thing. Like the entire time, my mind was really engaged with what was going on here from the get-go, and I thought that was pretty amazing, and it keeps me thinking about these questions.
For sure. And it's interesting too, like, I feel like this one is a little more concrete than the first one, and yet at the same time I do feel like there's some stuff enough to keep me up awake at night, you know, which I appreciate. But another thing I wanted to ask you both about is, I mean, this movie was, you know, kept under wraps, you know, very intensely, maybe too intensely, judging by the box office numbers. But we now know that the big hook is the idea of children, and can a replicant conceive a child? And and starting with you, Hannah, I wanted to hear from both of you. Like, what do you think of that angle? Do you like it, and how do you think that, you know, affects the Blade Runner saga? Which it feels weird to call it a saga because I'm so used to thinking it was just one film, but like how it what that does, like kind of basing like a lot of the story around like the idea of birth and children and procreation.
That's something that's in a lot of science fiction. So you see it in, what was it, Children of Men.
Absolutely,
and The Handmaid's Tale is all about who can and can't have children and what makes you, and I mean in that case the people who can have children live kind of horrible lives. So it is a common theme in sci-fi. In this case, I didn't feel like they explained it that well. I didn't feel like they explained, like, it was one scene with Harrison Ford where he was like, the plan was that I was never going to be around. Like, you
Sure.
were never going to be around Rachel? Like, isn't this the love of your life or something? Isn't that what makes her human, is that you as a human can love her as an individual, and then the whole plan the entire time was you were going to be not around?
I did get kind of like Harry Potter,
Yeah.
Skywalker flashbacks there.
Yeah.
The baby in the basket kind of thing. Like.
Yeah, so I felt like it needed more explanation. I felt like it was an important concept, but without, you know, the context of why why this came up with Deckard and Rachel, and without the context of, you know, what Jared Leto's character, I can't remember his name.
Wallace.
Oh,
Wallet.
Yeah.
Why he was failing. Like, they didn't really explain kind of what it was about Rachel that allowed that to happen.
Sure.
So I felt like it kind of took away from which is why I love sci-fi, and I'm a huge sci-fi nerd, is that everyone can have a million different kind of perceptions of it. But I felt like it took away the strength of what they were trying to ask or trying to say about childbirth and being able to have a kid without those kind of contexts to create like why it happened for Rachel and why it wasn't working for Jared Leto.
Gotcha. Well, I find what you're saying so interesting because I think you're absolutely right. It's such an important idea in sci-fi, with, you know, like in, you know, Children of Men, you know, children representing kind of the last, you know, good innocent thing, you know, in a sort of a grim world that people want to protect. And I also thought I was thinking about Mad Max, and, you know, Morton Joe and the death of the child and that, and the idea that, like, and then this is kind of the same thing with Wallace, you know, wanting to get his hands on the child, like kind of the forces of good and evil fighting, you know, well, they're fighting for control the future, you know, and same as in Children of Men, like you alluded to. Yeah.
I have a slightly different interpretation of the whole childbirth aspect. I know you guys are bringing up like Children of Men and Mad Max, which is fair. I mean, you're right. There is a lot of the theme of childbirth in some sci-fi movies, but I thought they were very specific in this one and pretty unique because they weren't just tackling the idea of childbirth and who can and cannot have children. They were really getting into this philosophical question of it's no longer do androids dream of electric sheep. It's can androids have babies, which is I think something that I'm not sure has been. I mean, if there's a film that really tackled on this question, let me know because I'd like to take a look at it. But
I can't think of one.
It's a very interesting question, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but I kind of go back to this fan thing discourse about how if Deckard is a replicant or not. I kind of,
Yes.
because of this movie, I kind of lean towards that he is a replicant. Deckard is a replicant. And that part of the plot, part of the background plot going on here is Wallace inherited Tyrell's intellectual properties. The one thing he doesn't have is this idea of replicants having kids. And you know, which is what thrusts this whole movie that I want to, and another reason why I want to see it again. But I think it's a pretty unique question. Replicants having kids? Mm-hmm. Because that changes a whole lot in this conversation about artificial intelligence. I thought the first movie really dealt with this, or a lot of films that deal with like androids and artificial intelligence is this idea of identity, like androids having their own identity, but kicking off the question of androids having babies, that takes this whole thing into really interesting territory.
It's interesting that you say that because I felt like this movie kind of showed once and for all that Deckard wasn't a replicant.
Oh,
so it's
okay.
interesting that you had that perspective.
We got a classic Deckard replicant human debate going on here. I like it.
Okay.
Because, well, one, I felt like it would have come up with Ryan Gosling because everyone he talked to was a replicant and he knew immediately. Like,
That's true.
the prostitute, the woman at the institute, and so it was weird that they didn't talk about being a replicant. But then also Harrison Ford runs through the door and then shuts it, and then Ryan Gosling runs through the wall at one of my favorite parts, and I thought that was I don't know, kind of showing a juxtaposition of their abilities and what they're able to do. So it's interesting that you had that perspective because even like that's the conversations that's been happening since the original. So it's interesting that people are still after this having those conversations because that was the big thing. Was he or wasn't he?
Yeah.
So that's really interesting.
I guess to emphasize this further, I kind of lean towards the idea that Deckard is Tyrell's ultimate replicant. That because he doesn't believe that he's a replicant, that instead of running through the walls, he takes the door. You have to program. He was programmed to believe that.
Rachel didn't believe she was, and he could determine that she was in the first film. So it's interesting. He would have to be programmed so well that he could, like, his job could be to determine whether people are or aren't replicants, but he wouldn't be able to do that by himself. And then it's interesting that he says to Rachel, or how does it go? I'm trying to remember. I watched it really recently, but Tyrell like explains to Deckard what Rachel is and why she can't, like that these are his niece's memories.
Oh, right. Exactly.
See,
yeah.
the thing that I'm grappling with, like if you were to tell me that Deckard was a human, I have trouble believing that he was able to procreate with a replicant. Because it doesn't, no matter how advanced we get in our technology, I have trouble believing that we will ever get to the point that we will solve everything in terms of mitochondria and everything on a DNA level. So you would have to create a fake a fake female and a fake male in order to create a fake offspring.
See, but at the same time, she dies. So it didn't work. It wasn't successful. She died in childbirth. The birth canal wasn't big enough. So you would think that in that way, he could be human because it wasn't a success. I mean, a child was born and the child lived, but the replicant didn't.
I mean, there's so much going on here. One thing I was thinking about, based on both of what you're saying, there's that line that Jared Leto has, like maybe you were designed to meet her, maybe that was, what you were programmed to do, and then he spit, and then he says, but were you designed? And, I felt like I like that, like kind of, keeping things like at least a little hazy there.
Yeah, it's intentionally ambiguous.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, what I was just going to say is that stresses me out, though, because if he is a replicant, like, he's in his 70s. Like, time's, not to be disrespectful, I'm a huge Harrison Ford man,
like
but
some kind of,
are we ever going to figure
model?
this out? Like, how many more of these is he going to make? I want to know once and for all if he is, I guess, because it's interesting, but time's a ticking.
Well, and yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing is that, Patrick, you were talking about having trouble believing that, you could make, create, like all these things where, like a replicant, could conceive of the human. And I think it's kind of interesting that both this film and the first one, they sort of very studiously avoid these scientific details. Like, it's very, like, kind of mysterious how these replicants even, come to be. Like, when Zora gets shot in the first one, you don't see, like, electric, like, gears under her skin. Like, it's kind of, again, like, there's sort of a haziness, which makes me think that, in a way, the real subject of the film's, like, is... It's almost not like literally about like artificial intelligence versus human intelligence, but that the questions the replicants deal with, who am I, what's my purpose, they're sort of questions we all deal with in a way. The politics, I think, are really intriguing in both films. Like, in both films, the corporate authority seems to supersede law enforcement, and there's like kind of this, we have in the first film, Tyrell is, top of his golden pyramid, and it's like this kind of murky, like almost lawless this world. Like, I don't know, maybe, and that maybe explains like the kind of moody haziness of both films. Like, kind of order is totally broken down. But sorry, Hannah, go ahead.
No, I don't actually know what I was going to say. I mean, I have some points, but I was going to say something in reaction to Patrick, but I don't remember.
Oh, no, it's fine. Well, I'm gonna say one more thing, and then I'll move on to another question. But just briefly going back to the idea of children, I think it's kind of interesting. I feel like it's largely symbolic, because it's implied that Rachel was the only one who could procreate, and that none of the other replicants can do it, which makes me think like, and yet they're basically willing. The replicants are basically willing to start a revolution based on this idea, which makes me think that the idea of procreation isn't so much, any of us can do it, so we're basically human, but one of us can, so that kind of symbolizes something about our species and how much we matter. So I feel like a lot of this is, is metaphorical to the replicants, which I think is interesting. But I wanted to move on to the idea of visual repetition, because visual repetition was so important in the first film. I mean, just the recurring shots of eyes, the origami, and also like kind of showing the same billboards over and over again. So you're kind of almost kind of like rolled into a daze. And it's interesting. That comes up again in this, but in very different forms of like Joy, feeling the rain on her hand versus Kay feeling the snow on his hand, and the fact that there's the replicant who Wallace kills. He kisses her before she dies. Love then kisses Kay, right before she thinks he's going to die, and so I was just curious to hear what both of you thought about this idea of visual repetition and in both films, really, what kind of effect it has on the viewer.
I know what you're talking about with the visual repetition thing. At first, I thought it was just what Ridley Scott and Denis Villeneuve, they're just kind of like injecting this sort of style, to fit into like a Blade Runner world. I'm not sure what to think of it. If it holds a whole lot of significance. My guess is that maybe it's an allusion to what Philip K. Dick was doing in the original book, but I haven't read the original book yet, so I don't know. I'm guessing it's a stylistic thing, but I'm not sure how significant it is in terms of a plot point.
In this film, I think what was specific, and I haven't quite connected it to the original, but what I think was specifically interesting about the repetition in this film was the different types of beings experiencing the same thing, which you kind of expressed, but like the raindrops on Joy, and then even so you have a hologram. Is that her?
I think so. Yeah.
Hologram.
Yeah.
So you have a hologram experiencing the same thing that a human's experiencing. That's the same thing that a replicant's experiencing, and they all, in a way, are, it's so visceral to feel the rain on you. And so for that to be something that they took the time to have her come out into the rain, and I don't know if she can feel it, but to experience that in the same way or in a similar way that a human does, it both shows the similarities and the differences. It shows her want to feel the same things, but the difference in that it's not the same. So I think in that case, some of those images of repetition were important in showing the differences the differences and similarities of how each being experiences a sensation. How that connects to the repetition in the first movie, I'm not sure, because I think it has multiple usages. I think in the first movie, like you said, it was very it was all excess in stimuli and kind of in your face in a way, but also kind of lulled you. Whereas in this movie, it was much more tied with emotion, I felt.
Sure.
Like the images you saw were high emotion images, like the toy and the child and the furnace and all of that.
Yeah, I think that's such an important distinction, because I was thinking about, like, when I watched the first film, I think there's so many compelling ideas in there, but I sometimes watch it almost purely as a visual experience, like almost just for the experience of being kind of lost in this world and following, Deckard down these shadowy, rainy streets. I like that kind of that dreamlike, as you pointed out, noir feel, just for the feeling itself, not just for what it represents. And then you bring up such a great point, because this repetition in the new one in 2049, they are like high emotion images, and there's a lot more like kind of direct symbolism, and the idea that kind of like reaching out to touch the rain or the snow is like almost like trying to like approximate humanity, trying to touch that, just as like when Kay's playing Frank Sinatra, and who he has Joy looking like, I don't know, like Grace Kelly in The Country Girl or something, like he's like kind of using these pop culture trappings to try and feel more human. Of course, it's a facsimile. It doesn't feel quite right, which I keep thinking of Robin Wright's line, which is, we're all just looking out for something real. In a way, I almost think that's even true of the human characters, because Wallace and Robin Wright, they're trapped inside these very kind of sterile worlds, and they're trying to find something real in their own way.
Well, and that's interesting, because in a way, a lot of the humans lacked humanity.
Yes,
and that was such a big part of it. And I should have seen this earlier because I'm terrible with names, and I would have remembered the names better. But what is the name? I tried to look it up of Deckard's child.
Oh,
in that glass.
Honest Denis.
Yes.
I had to Google that.
Okay, good.
I missed it too.
If they don't say it a million times, it just goes out of my head.
You know what's fascinating about that character? Is that she had such a rich and vivid imagination and the ability to dream.
Yes, yeah.
And that answers a whole lot of interesting questions about artificial intelligence. But anyways, that's my notice of that. I thought that was fascinating.
Well, and what's also interesting about her was what you were talking about with, the snow and everything, is it seemed really purposeful that when they were leaving the snow outside, and she, probably hasn't truly felt snow since because she went in at 8 into that thing, and then Harrison Ford walks in, or Deckard walks in, and she's standing in snow feeling it. So it's like...
I forgot about that,
Yeah, so it's an image that she hasn't even been outside basically her entire life, and she feels it too. So I think those images really showed kind of the humanity through, hypothetically inhuman things.
Yeah.
And it was really purposeful in this movie in a way that I think I agree. It was purposeful in the first one, but it wasn't as tied to purposeful emotions or reactions.
Yeah. I think it kind of speaks to something it's a real difference between Ridley Scott and Denis Villeneuve. I think Ridley Scott, he said recently, art's like the shark. You've got to keep swimming or you'll die. and I sort of think that Ridley Scott is almost kind of a shark-like director. He's very instinctual, and he maybe cranks out movies a little too fast these days, kind of like Woody Allen, whereas Villeneuve is so kind of methodical and purposeful, and there's always an idea he's trying to get at, I think, with each film, which in the case of some of his other films, Prisoners and Sicario, I don't think the idea was very good in those cases, but when he does pick a good idea, I really appreciate it. But I want to, this is kind of a geeky thing to get into. Since we're talking about the daughter, played by Carla Juri, I was curious to hear what both of you think. Do you think she's really sick, or is that just a conspiracy to keep her safe until the right moment? Because that's how I saw it.
But that's the other thing about this movie that drives me crazy. She's technically the employee of the guy trying to find her entire life. Are you kidding me? She's down the road and he doesn't know who she is. It seems crazy to me.
That's a good point. That's true. That's very true.
I loved the line of her making the distinction between he wanted to hire me, but I'm a subcontractor because I take what freedom I can get. I thought that was a really important line. But when when it all was revealed at the end, I was like, so it's your boss that wants to find you?
No.
What?
I think Deckard was the missing piece here. So if you were to interpret it that way, it's almost as if the ending is actually a negative ending.
Really?
It's as if Deckard walked into the trap because Wallace needs Deckard in order to continue the experiment.
But the point of that was, the point of what Kay said was that they now think Deckard's dead, right?
Yes, that is true, yeah.
The reason he was able to go in was because they all think he's dead, but even then we're in this dystopia world. Do they not have cameras? They knew where they were at all times.
Watch this again.
Sure. No, yeah, I hope that he's not walking into the trap, because that's so sad. But this is Blade Runner world. I could certainly imagine that being the case.
Clarify the plot again. I'll see it again.
But what? So what happens now? Does she live there? Does he break her out? Because I don't think she really needed to be. I don't think she really had this disease.
It could go either way.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
needed to be. I think this was a way to protect her. So now that Deckard's there, what's the plan? Is she able to get out? Is it like a prison? And she said people put her in there. Her parents put her in there. Who were her parents? Anyway,
Yeah.
I had so many questions.
No, that's a good point. And there are. Yeah.
But Wallace Corp, they want to find Deckard, right?
Oh,
They
yes.
were-
Yeah.
I mean, just like that one scene where I forget her name, the one who works for Jared Leto. That
Oh, love.
Love.
Yeah.
Love, how she was like dropping bombs from satellites to help Kay,
Yes, yeah.
and then she was
Well, she's
she
having
was
her nails
saying
done,
she
no?
was saying like, do your fucking job and find Deckard. They were using Kay as a foot soldier to find Deckard, and he did,
Sure.
and
yeah.
he brought Deckard to his daughter.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that was the whole plan all along.
Yeah, well, maybe. I mean, if they have some way of tracking Kay, I mean, they did it before. But
Like Hannah said, like what if she wasn't really sick? That she was just there as a trap,
yeah, yeah, no, yeah. I could.
so that Wallace can continue his masturbation job of making replicants who can procreate. Continue Tyrell's experiment.
Sure. This is a tangent, but I do want to say I really liked the scene where she was ordering the drone strike, just sitting in her sunglasses and fire again. Like I thought it was like kind of like funny. It's like she just sort of like I like how she kind of almost randomly comes in and saves him, and that's just how weird the Blade Runner universe, I guess we have to call it now, is. Like,
That's basically where Warfare is headed.
Yeah.
Warfare is turning into a video game. I think they even kind of got into this in Guardians of the Galaxy Part 2, where everybody was just playing video games and like they had robots who were doing all the fighting.
The
That's what we're
gold
doing
like
these days.
arcade machine
Yeah,
things,
yeah. That's what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah. It's the opposite of Dunkirk, basically.
yeah, pretty much.
Well, I mean, we're we've been talking about this movie in relation to the first one a lot, but I do want to go into that just a little more because I think it's such an interesting case study.
It is.
Because this film takes so much from the first one and couldn't exist without it, and yet there are profound differences in terms of themes and in terms of locations and in terms of the acting. So I just wanted to hear from both of you what you thought of like kind of how they compare, basically.
As I already said, I am a fan of the first one quite a bit more. I love the noir aspect. I love the mystery. And you both have talked about the visuals of the most recent film, and I honestly was disappointed, which sounds crazy because it was visually really cool, and I loved especially Jared Leto's lair, and I loved how they did do some of the bigger shots. That's obviously an improvement from the original, but I thought it lacked grit in the close-up shots, like where he's walking around the city and stuff. There was less fear and suspense built up because the first movie, I'm really glad I watched it recently because the whole beginning is just tense. There's so much tension in the film, and it does it so well. And in this film, I felt like it wasn't as tense because it wasn't a mystery in the same way. It was more of an action sci-fi thriller, and he is trying to solve it and figure it out, but it wasn't in these kind of gritty ways. And I don't even know if it's a bad thing that it's not as gritty, because I think it was more commercial. Because when you're walking around, it wasn't, I don't know, it didn't feel as much like the world that they had created in the first one, which, I mean, I guess it's good, time's gone by, but in the first one, it's so grungy and gritty, and you're like tense watching him walk around. You don't know if he's in danger, or if he's not, or if and this, I wasn't ever worried. Like, he was fine. Like, I was like, you're okay, just go talk to the prostitutes, you're fine. Like, it didn't have that, grittiness, I guess, that I've said a million times of the first one.
I feel like you're getting towards the differences in directing styles between Ridley Scott and Denis Villeneuve. And I agree with you that the first film was gritty, but I think Ridley Scott in that era, when he was doing the first Alien and stuff, he was really good at that. And I thought he did it really well in Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner as well. But at the same time, I don't fault Denis Villeneuve for not replicating that aspect of it. I just think it's a difference in style between the two. But I can imagine if you're a huge fan of the original film, that maybe you're not gonna like this one so much. But I think I'm in the opposite end where I'm a huge fan of the material itself, the storyline. Philip K. Dick is what he was getting towards, but I thought the first film was okay. I'm not a huge fan of what Ridley Scott did with it. Personally, I'm more towards Denis Villeneuve's style. But then again, there are also two different films. The first film was a lot about Deckard and Rachel. The second film is the story of Kay in the same universe. So I guess it makes sense that they would be a little different. Like Kay seems like a more chill replicant, I suppose. He's not as gritty, so maybe it was appropriate that the film was not as gritty.
Point Gosling.
Yes, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I lean more towards Villeneuve than Scott as well, but one of the few complaints I did have about the newer film is I have to agree I do think it lacked the grit, and I think like kind of there was something to, for lack of a better word, like so celluloidy about that first film, like really like kind of rough, tactile textures, kind of like dirt and graininess and like kind of inkiness, and there was do you know if 2049 was shot digitally or if it was filmed? Because I don't know.
I think it was 35 millimeter. Yeah.
Okay, because I think...
But of course heavily edited with all the visual effects and stuff.
Sure, because I think like maybe like, like in terms of the cinematography, maybe like Roger Deakins as well as Villeneuve could have pushed the grit a little more. Like not only to make it like more, not necessarily just to make it more like the first film, but just to like kind of give that kind of texture. Because I thought about like I don't know. This makes me think of like Batman Begins, which is a movie that Christopher Nolan has said visually was actually inspired by Blade Runner, and I feel like Batman Begins pretty successfully like recreates that gaminess, that where you feel like you can reach in and feel that, and I don't think Deakins and Villeneuve were as successful at that part of it as Nolan were, even though I think they're master storytellers.
It felt very green screen to me. I think that's the kind of the trend of most. I mean, we have the technology now, so a lot of it was obviously an improvement. But I think I wanted to see more contrast between Jared Leto's like settings or lair or corporation, and I wanted more grit on the street. Like I felt like it was all too kind of what you're saying, but I think the contrast would have been important.
Sure, yeah.
And it was very I just watched the original and it's just so gritty, and this it felt very smooth. The textures were off. It all kind of, there were a lot of similarities between where Jared Leto was and where Deckard was, and in the color schemes and the lines and all of that. So I wanted more contrast between kind of the corporations and the street and his world and the LAPD and his apartment and all of that.
I think I would kind of inject another point here just to get out of the Blade Runner universe for a second, say that we're comparing two films that were filmed in different eras of filmmaking.
That's true.
We're talking about early 80s, late 70s, and I think a lot of the style that we're talking about, I think was, a lot of it is due to necessity, because they didn't have the technology back then, so they kind of had to do things differently. So I think a lot of the grit that we're talking about here it's easy to latch onto that with earlier filmmaking, because I'm not just thinking of Blade Runner, I'm thinking of like Star Wars, Alien, all these films. They all have that sort of grit, and a lot of that it's not easy to replicate now because we have different tools now.
Yes, I mean, I definitely see that, and I think there's been a lot of discussion about practical effect versus, computer, and a lot of people liked, Star Wars: The Force Awakens for going back to doing a lot of the things that the original three did well.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree that technology has changed, but at the same time, Blade Runner created a world. It created an entire world that was a unique science fiction kind of entity that never existed before and came out of a really creative place. So I think that, I expected it to be obviously more technological. I expected it to be more advanced, but I expected it to hold on to the feeling of that. So even if you're going to use technology, even if you're not going to focus as much on, practical effects or textures in the same way they had to out of necessity in the first one, I think they needed to kind of keep some of that darkness in a way, because it's what made that such a stark, depressing future to look at.
Sure,
You watched it. I mean, I wasn't alive, but you watched it, and it was you're worried. You're thinking it's what year did it come out?
82.
82,
Yeah.
And it was
2019.
2019. Yeah, you thought you had no comprehension of what 2019 would actually look like, and so I think keeping that darkness would have been really powerful in the movie in a way.
Yeah.
I craved that grit, even if it wasn't going to be done in the same way as the original.
Yeah. I think conceptually, a lot of the stuff about the future was done really well. I really liked the, radioactive, wasteland, where there's a casino, and I liked the, I thought the seawall was very brilliant.
That was cool.
that was a cool kind of scary preview of where things are going, and so I feel like it was I was stylistically I had some concerns, and it was more like the concepts like that I felt kind of aided the story, or in the case symbolized where things might be going. But I mean, again, with the seawall, that was the stuff I thought was the most successful.
I mean, despite the prettiness of the visuals, I still think they successfully created a horrific world for me anyways. But that's just me. But I also think that you don't have to rely on technology so much in terms of modern filmmaking, despite having all these tools. You can do a really gritty film. I think one of the grittiest I can think of in dystopian films is Children of Men. That was extremely gritty. I mean, to the point where I just wanted to cry.
It was almost like a docudrama thing.
Yeah,
with that one shot in the car that every film student will show as a presentation at some point in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
But then we are talking about Denis Villeneuve here. I think if you compare to Arrival, you kind of expected him to do this with Blade Runner, because the wide shots and just the cinematography and those choices.
Yeah. I thought it was kind of interesting, seeing Villeneuve play in another director's sandbox, because Arrival, feels so, real, kind of the look of the grass and the tents and the military hardware and the clunky but very real looking orange hazmat suits, which, I think are probably burned into everyone's memories by now. And it's so interesting to see the contrast between that and going to the Blade Runner world, which is, as for all its darkness, has always been kind of magical, kind of poetic, with this sort of ethereal quality. So I think it pushed him in some interesting directions he might not have gone in. But I've got one more question for both of you. And if you have other things you want to bring up after that, that's totally fine. Or if you want to say sayonara, that's cool too. It depends on how we're feeling after this one. But I hesitate to talk about the box office, because I think in a lot of ways it really doesn't matter, you know. But I think it is instructive to
I have a point about that.
Okay, cool, good. I'm
go ahead and
glad.
finish your point.
I think it is instructive to think of it in terms of if a movie does well financially, that means something went right. Maybe it was just the marketing, maybe it was word of mouth, you know, maybe it's just, you know, plain and simple, people love the movie. And if a movie doesn't do super well financially, it does mean that, you know, whether it's a great film or not, something did go wrong, you know, whether it was the marketing or whether it was, the movie was, you know, too weird for, you know, the average film goer that, you know, wasn't, you know, isn't really into the whole kind of Blade Runner milieu. So I just wanted to hear from both of you if you have any theories about why this movie is underperforming, and do you think that even matters or is even significant?
I think it's interesting. I think it's really interesting in the context of the box office right now. For example, we were talking about the wonderful movie, I'm saying sarcastically, The Mummy, and how it didn't do well at the box office here, but overseas it made an obscene amount of money.
That's
and then
right. That's so depressing.
Mother, with their marketing, it didn't go well, and it's not doing well at the box office. So I think with this, there's a couple things that I think are against it. One, the runtime.
Yeah.
2 hours and 44 minutes for a movie that a lot of people critique the first one for feeling slow. And I don't agree. I thought it built suspense in a really good way. But if you have a movie that didn't do well the first time commercially, it really became a cult success. And that's where its following came from. And so, you know, I mean, nerds unite. We can all go and see it, but we're only one part of the population. We're not it's not globally loved or cherished. It's become more respected in film itself and in sci-fi and all of that. But ultimately, if not that many like regular people who aren't, you know, crazy nerds didn't love it the first time, are you going to get the masses to come see it? And it had a lot of star power, so I thought they could. I thought, you know, you have Ryan Gosling, you have Harrison Ford, you have Jared Leto, who everyone loves right now, Robin Wright, who is, you know, a classic. I love her. But, you know, 2 hours and 44 minutes for a movie that was critiqued for being kind of boring and slow when it came out. Are people going to rush to go see it? And I guess not. I think that they needed, one, to cut down the runtime if they were looking for the masses. I think if they weren't looking for the masses, then they needed to lower their budget to make it make more sense. But it was one of the most expensive movies in a long time, I read, that they made.
$150 million, And that's not even getting into marketing.
Yeah, so if you're going to spend that much and it's on a movie that's been called slow originally, and it's almost 3 hours. You know, Lord of the Rings became, you know, a huge success. People flocked to it, and they would have seen 4-hour movies probably at that point, but there was a lot of people behind that. This, you have a like small portion of people that, you know, love the original and respect it who are going to go see it. So I think that they counted too much on Harrison Ford and Ryan Gosling to bolster it in this case.
I think I want to, I'll move on to you in a sec, Patrick, but just speaking to the runtime, I mean, I love really long movies because I like the experience of just like kind of, I feel like you get like so much more overwhelmed, you know, when you're in there for 3 hours or so instead of 2. But I mean, you know, looking at the market, I mean, I think the last few films that were anywhere near this runtime that did this well were Interstellar and The Dark Knight Rises, both of which I loved. And I mean, those you could put, you know, from the director of The Dark Knight, you know, on. I mean, you couldn't do that with this. Arrival only made like $100 million, so it's a different thing. But what were you going to say, Patrick?
Oh no, Well, personally, I liked it for the way it was all around, right? But so sociologically speaking, since we're talking about box office, I just feel like dystopian movies, really long movies, surrealist cinema, black humor, those things don't really play well with U.S. audiences for whatever reason. But,
Well, Children of Men don't do well at the box office.
yeah. So this is not really that big of a surprise to me. In terms of runtime, I mean, the way the film was, I'm happy with the way the film was, but you probably could have shaved at least 15 minutes off of it to bring it to the 2.5 hour mark. Maybe that would have made it a little more attractive to some people. I mean, I like long movies as well, like you, Ben, but when I saw the runtime at 2:40, I was like, what the fuck?
Well, and the first one was under 2 hours, so it's a big jump.
I was like, okay, this is interesting.
But you said something really interesting. You said, I didn't expect people to flock to it. And it's like, I didn't expect people to flock to it, and you didn't probably expect people to flock to it. They did. They spent $150 million on it. They expected people to flock. They expected to kind of cash in on these sci-fi has been doing a lot better. I mean, we've been mentioning Arrival, Interstellar, Gravity did well commercially.
Oh, Gravity, yeah.
So, I think they really did expect it, and none of us are surprised. We were all like, why would you, I mean, at least I was like, why would you spend so much on a movie without any kind of basis of how it's going to go?
I want to get to my next point here, like how when I interrupted you earlier, I kind of feel like the business is changing, Hollywood, and I'm hoping, anyways, that we're starting to see a new golden age in filmmaking, because I feel like in terms of the business of making these high budget movies, I think the old rules no longer apply, and I have a feeling a lot of people in Hollywood are getting fired right now because of the flops of since the last Superman movie, the Batman versus Superman. There's just so many movies that they spent so much money on that are flops.
This year especially, I think has been extraordinarily bad.
I think the people with the deep pockets in Hollywood are finally throwing their hands up in the air and saying, okay, you're the artist, you know what you're doing, do whatever the fuck you want. So they're doing that. They're allowing Villeneuve to make his movie 2 hours and 44 minutes as opposed to 2 hours and 25 minutes.
Sure.
We're seeing Aronofsky include a scene that probably would not have been greenlit 5 years ago. I mean, we're seeing things a little different these days, and I hope that continues, that trend, because we're seeing more, or at least I'm seeing more art for art's sake, as opposed to movies being made to make a return on investment, which I think is poisonous. My politics on this.
Yeah.
So,
no, it is poisonous, and I think it's really interesting. Like, I mean, again, we were talking of Aronofsky and Mother. Like, the people over Paramount have been very surprisingly defensive of the movie.
Let me extend my point before you continue on yours. The last time we saw something like this was around the mid-'70s, when Hollywood was not making any money. Nobody was going to the cinema. And I feel like we're seeing a similar thing these days. But you know what's interesting about that period?
Yeah.
That's when we saw Coppola, Scorsese, George Lucas. That's when all of these guys came up. If Hollywood doesn't pull back and take a more stops trying to control the business so much and allows artists to do what they want, then we're going to see a new crop of directors come up, just like George Lucas and Coppola and all those guys. And I have a feeling like Aronofsky, Villeneuve, these guys could be the new golden generation of this time period. So I'm really hoping that things continue on this trend.
I think it's really interesting to think about the time period in the 70s in particular, because the late 60s, early 70s, you were dealing with mega flops like Cleopatra, and then all of a sudden you have these really risky films like Bonnie and Clyde, like The Graduate, Taxi Driver, Easy Rider, that are that are making huge sums of money, and we we could, be on
Star Wars.
Well,
for
yeah,
fuck's sake.
Star Wars. I mean, we forget now, but Star Wars was the underdog, back then. As funny as it is
Nobody
to say.
thought it was going to make anything.
Oh, the studio didn't think it was going to be successful either. They hated it.
Mark Hamill thought it was a joke.
No,
But he
I
did
think
it.
all the actors did. Yeah,
They all thought it was a joke. The
Yeah,
only one who took it seriously was George Lucas.
and I think even he was like, has regrets, like, my cinematographer sucks, and
Our whole fucking pop culture revolves around Star Wars now.
yeah. And so, I think, the thing is, like, kind of these big budget flops in the 60s did spur a golden age, I think. And, maybe we're coming to that point because there are a lot of movies that, conventional wisdom says would do well, like The Mummy, The Mummy, it's a tried and true franchise. It has Tom Cruise, and obviously it did great internationally, which, I wouldn't, put it past them to make a Mummy 2 based on that.
Probably they will.
Yeah, but at the same time, the domestic box office, the writing is on the wall. People are kind of, wising up about some of this cinematic universe nonsense. People are saying, no, I'm not going to, give up, 5 hours of my life to see Pirates of the Caribbean. Will it never end? I'm not going to, see, Transformers 5 billion. And so, the thing is, for every, Blade Runner 2049 underperforms, there is like a Dunkirk or a Baby Driver, and even though we were talking about Baby Driver, it's in a lot of ways a disappointment. It was still kind of a risk, to do like a car movie with Ansel Elgort, doing sign language, like there was still like it's still like an auteur project. So I'm hopeful, and then and specifically in reference to the Blade Runner box office, I have to admit, I thought the trailers were so cool. I thought everyone would rush out to see it. What I now realize was that just showing a bunch of pretty images shot by Roger Deakins, that works on nerds like me. But other people like probably looked at that and went like, what's this even about? And so, but I think it's almost like kind of fate. That it's like, oh, it's a Blade Runner movie. Of course, like it's not like a big like 100 million opening weekend kind of movie. It's more like this movie that kind of lingers on and people fight over.
But they thought it would be, I think, is the thing. I think
absolutely.
they anticipated that it was
Yeah.
going to be one of those 100 million, and they obviously thought that when how much of the trailers had Harrison Ford and Jared Leto in it versus how much of the percentage of the movie were they actually in.
Well, they were each of them were. You could count like the number of scenes each of them were in on one hand.
Yeah,
basically.
exactly.
Yeah,
It was just
that's the
two in
point,
Jared Leto's case.
Because it was the story of Kate, not the story of Kate and Deckard. But they showed a lot of Deckard in the trailers.
Yeah. No, this is Ryan Gosling too. Like, all right, yeah.
It was.
He was great in this movie, by the way.
Oh, he was wonderful. Yeah, I thought it was like kind of Drive 2.0, and I love drives.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, we were gonna.
Oh
say,
no.
Oh, cool.
No.
I feel like I was gonna say something else, but yeah, I don't know, kind of like with seeing how like Paramount has dealt with Mother and standing by the film. I hope this will studios will come to see that even if a movie isn't a financial success, there's still value in making it. And
At the same time, though, it would be stupid of them to not stand by Mother when Jennifer Lawrence is a big budget.
That's true.
Javier
That's fair.
Bardem
Yeah,
brings
yeah.
in some money, and then Black Swan was a humongous, financial success
Yeah,
as well. So
yeah.
they better stand by it because I'm sure one of them will turn around and make them a ton of money.
That's true. Yeah.
I think, just a side point, I think Jennifer Lawrence is a very strong front runner for Best Actress.
Yeah, oh no, she was incredible. Yeah, no, I would vote for her. But well, in terms of the box office again, let's think about this movie was made by Alcon Entertainment, which is in the toilet at this point. I think they were desperate. I think this movie got made because they were
It was 3 studios.
It was like Alcon made it, but I think Warner's distributing it in the United States, Sony's distributing it abroad,
Oh, I see.
and so but I think
But it was an Alcon primarily.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Alcon, like kind of like at this point, like after having all these flops like that, Point Break remake, which I think they kind of like felt like it was sort of like a last stand, like oh, this thing people like, we're gonna pump a bunch of money into it.
Well, and also, when this movie was being made, I think a lot of movies have already been made when there's a huge superhero movies kind of flooded the market, and they are the huge, spend a lot, make a lot, and that's not going so well for them. But when a lot of these movies were made, I think that was still happening, and they were kind of still, movies were still making a little bit more money when they probably had this thought as well. So a lot of these places are trying to, like The Mummy, what it's trying to do is, capitalize on this superhero box office success. And I think this was
Russell
trying
Crowe
to
was
do
Nick
it.
Fury.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this missed it. I think if this had come out a year ago, it probably could have done better, box office wise.
Well, the tide is turning. I am for instance, War for the Planet of the Apes. I think is one of the best films of the year, but didn't do so well in the U.S. And there are a lot of reasons for that. The marketing. I think just showing a bunch of posters of apes on horses. It's like, yeah, that's what the marketing was for Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. People are over that. But at the same time, I think there's like a degree of sequel spin-off fatigue.
Yes.
Like when every other movie is one of those, it hurts the ones like Apes that are actually good. Like The Weekend Before Apes, people got inundated with yet another Spider-Man movie, and I know a lot of people love Homecoming. I hated Homecoming. I thought it was awful. So it's like I get the tiredness, and I think I think the studios are paralyzed by fear. I think they will always think of franchises as safe. But then on the other hand, when even, something supposedly critic-proof like Pirates of the Caribbean or Transformers isn't doing well, maybe that's going to start to wean them off a little? I don't know. Maybe that's being too optimistic.
It's a sign. You
Yes,
can see
it
it.
is a sign.
Take it.
Yeah.
I'm so tired of these. And I think it's fitting that as superhero movies are becoming so generic and kind of just cranked out in a way, I think it's interesting that we have like the most tired middle-aged Batman we've ever had. Meanwhile, we're like tired of all these movies. We have the Batman for the type of movies we're being given. It says a lot that they gave Patty Jenkins a significantly smaller amount of funds to use. She was highly successful, and then they go back and reshoot a ton more, Wonder Woman scenes to put in all the upcoming Justice League and and it's like, that's saying something. If you have one superhero that's making like money and is making that's saying something about all the other ones going on right now.
I've got another take on this too. Also, I think in terms of society in general, I think I'm not speaking for everybody here, but it seems like there's just so much going on in the world right now. Like the world is burning. It feels like the world is going to end soon.
Yeah.
But why would we?
Feels like the last act of Mother.
Why would we want to go into a dark room and watch a fake character called Thanos destroy the world and have a bunch of superheroes to do this inside of this thing? Why do I want to spend money for that when I'm outside of the theater? I have no money because my job sucks. We have this fucking joke of a president.
Yes.
Nuclear missiles are going to fly any second. Why do I want to go in that world when I'm so fucking scared of this world? And I don't even have any money to spend.
Some people could say that's why Blade Runner isn't doing well box office wise, is because it is this horrible dystopia. It is something that it feels like a lot of ways we are living in a universe run by corporations that don't care about really anything but money. So it's like, I think that, if you look, we were talking earlier about horror and how horror does a really good job of mirroring the anxieties of the decade or the time. And I think that in this case, box office wise, we have a lot of these anxieties. My mom works at Intel, and AI is something that I talk to her friends about all the time. They're all working on it. A ton of companies are. Our world is not in a good place. So that also could be why, I mean, no one really wants to go in and, see, a possible future. Probably not a probable one, but possible.
Well, I think you both raised some really great points, and I mean, I think that's true, Hannah. In a grim period of history, the desire for escapism is that much stronger. I mean,
yeah.
And then also, I mean, like with what you're seeing, Patrick, I think I do feel a bit of what you're talking about, which is that, I mean, like, there's some movies that I do think are truly escapist that, I find kind of satisfying, like, Don't Hate Me, but I liked Cars 3, I thought Cars 3 was fun, it was big and goofy and colorful and silly, and I thought it was good escapism. But then I do sometimes, feel like a little irritated when a movie feels like a hermetically sealed world, and I often think, the kind of, confronting reality and a little bit of escapism, they can almost go hand in hand when they're done well, because, I think you're right, Hannah. I think, the bleak future in Blade Runner may be why people don't want to come out. On the other hand, it's this cool movie with flying cars. I mean, it is kind of fun in a way, and so I think it's just funny how those things, interact. Same thing with Mother. When things, go to shit in the end, it's really horrifying. But then it's like, well, it's really fast paced and well edited. You can dance to it.
Well, we're movie nerds, so we're gonna see movies with anyway.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is with horror, I just read an article actually about how people who suffer from anxiety like horror because it brings you into maybe a different anxiety, but it's not your own. It's kind of fear in a different, kind of more removed way. And I actually relate a lot to that. I love the way horror really takes me out of my head in other ways, but I think that horror uses kind of anxieties about the time in a more metaphorical way, and sci-fi, though there is a lot of metaphor, it's also just so much more of a commentary. Whereas horror, I mean, you look at The Omen and you look at the 70s and the fear at the time and how those movies, reflected that. I think sci-fi does a really good job of kind of, it doesn't shy away from it like horror does. It's very blunt with kind of the anxieties and the commentary and what it's saying about, human interaction in society. It's so much more in your face. So I think our audience is right now willing to pay to see that when they're kind of dealing with it every day on the news. I don't know. I think at a different time this movie could have done a lot better commercially.
It's so interesting, what you're pointing out about horror, because it's I haven't seen It Follows, but from what I've read about it, it sounds like, there's the argument that, maybe, the monster is kind of like an STD, basically. Mm-hmm. But then I'm sure there are viewers, who could convincingly make the argument that, that's reading too much into it, Whereas, with, Planet of the Apes and, Woody Harrelson is, making an apes, and the apes, build a wall to keep some people out. It's it's kind of hard to shut out the allegory there, because it's so on the nose, which I say that with affection because I appreciate it. But I think you're right. Sci-fi is harder to kind of separate from the real world.
That's a really good example. I really like that, because it does show kind of, in one you kind of escape into the fantasy or the mystery a little bit more, and in this, and maybe that's why I wanted more of the noir in this movie, is because that helped me escape into the first one a little bit more. This one, it was, it didn't kind of mask it at all. It kind of was just, what it is, and you had to kind of deal with it. And I don't know, sci-fi asks that of audience a lot, and I don't know if audiences always respond depending on the time and what's going on and all of that. But I think it was asking audiences to kind of, look at it kind of head on, and I think that did play into the box office.
Which is why I'm so curious to see, if people remember 2049 10 years down the line, what will they think? Because I think the original means something different to people now than it meant when it first came out. So that piques my interest.
Is it going to have the cult status? So it's not doing well at the box office. Is it going to become a cult classic in the same way? Is it going to have the same respect?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, the sort of the freshness is gone, but will the story still hold people?
I suppose it's doing it correctly, right? I mean, a lot of cult classics didn't do well at the box office.
You'd almost say it's like a badge of honor, I guess. Nobody understands. No.
I know, but it's so obvious they didn't want this to be a cult classic.
No,
that
you're absolutely right.
That it's funny because we can see it that way because we are movie fans.
Yeah.
But they really didn't want it to be. But I'm wondering, will it be? Because it wasn't commercially successful. Will it end up being that
I guess
way?
it's consistent with the first film then, because I think the first film they also marketed to wider audiences.
Okay.
They
probably thought
hired
Harrison Ford, Indiana
Harrison
Jones,
Ford,
Han Solo.
Ridley Scott. I mean, they intentionally wanted wider audiences to grasp onto it, but it didn't.
Yeah.
With the first one as well. So it's kind of interesting that we're seeing a repeat of history.
We are.
It's so funny to think the first Blade Runner is not this weird niche thing. I mean, it's on the National Film Registry, which means it's going to be preserved for eternity, or as long as the National Film Registry lasts. One of its biggest fans is some guy named Barack Obama. But I don't know this. I think the reception to 2049 proved that it's that world and that kind of surreal way of storytelling. It is hard for it to kind of reach the audience that maybe the studio wants it to. So I think that's interesting. I think that may be that may be why I like it. Not that I like it because it didn't reach people, but because it, I don't know, the things that alienate people may be why I like it. But
well, and I don't know if we want to. This might be too long for today, but I mean, it will be interesting to see. The first one wasn't a commercial success. It was panned by critics initially, and then kind of slowly got respect. And now, like you're saying, it is a highly respected film. Will that happen with this? I personally don't think it will. I don't think this is going to trickle out for the next few years and more critics are going to keep talking to it, because I think movies are very different now with social media and how fast they come out. I don't think this will have the same longevity or the same kind of status as the first one. But in a way, like Patrick said, we are seeing history kind of repeat itself. So it might, who knows, in the next few years, is this going to, build in, success or respect like the first one? I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know, because when I look at the critical response on Rotten Tomatoes, I don't care about audience response, but a lot of critics are really loving this movie.
that's true, yeah.
I would say at a rate of 9 out of 10 critics really love this movie.
But is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because initially they didn't love the first one, and now it's in history books.
That's true. Well, I mean, it's so funny because there is that kind of immediateness with social media. On the other hand, you have the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. That was panned, but it was released, I think, in 2007 or something, and now it's everyone talks about that to the point where I'm I'm gonna have to see that, But
You haven't seen it?
No, I haven't.
Oh my god!
You
Okay, I'm gonna have to see it clearly. Yeah, but so I don't know. It's an interesting thing. If there's any movie that does pull that off from this year, I would think it would be Mother, just because that movie's so inciting and rubs people really the wrong way or really the right way.
I think Mother is a really unique experience in today's. I haven't seen it. I'm behind the times, but just the way it's been received and like its success or lack of success and how polarizing it is, I think it is kind of unique. I don't think we get movies like that very often anymore.
No, not very often. No, not at all.
I'm glad it was made.
And those used to exist a lot more, you know, where we weren't able to just immediately text people or call people or tweet about it. So there was a lot more like polarization that we don't have anymore. Now the masses all love a movie or they all hate it, and that's really all we hear.
And then Rotten Tomatoes kind of sort of like furthers this like illusion of consensus, like kind of like we're all in this together. And,
yes.
I don't think Mother would have been greenlighted 5 years ago. I feel like it's only being made now because, as I hinted towards earlier, like I feel like there's a breakdown in the Hollywood system right now. And
in terms of like there's a space for more chances to be taken.
They're allowing artists to be artists, and I really like that.
I think there's also been a shift in Hollywood from just white men to, you know, bringing in, you know, women, people of color, LGBT. There's a lot more perspectives and influences, and I think that's also changing kind of the backlash of like, how many of these X-Men are we going to have? Are they just going to keep going and going and going and going and going?
Yeah.
So there's this like craving for new perspectives and new stories, because how many remakes have we had in the last 5 years? How many Jungle Books are we going to have? Like, how many white guys are going to make the Jungle Book? That's the question we need to answer.
I think 3 total, because there's a sequel to the one, and there's Andy Serkis's.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I think that's also playing a huge part in, you know, we're finally getting more perspectives for the first time, and it's not the same group of people kind of just continuing on through the decades, and then the people they like continue on after them. And hopefully that's also going to bring a ton more creativity to the staleness of movies in the last 10 years.
I'm hopeful. I'm being hopeful, but I feel like we're headed in that direction, and I hope so.
I do too.
I really hope so.
I know. They were all so shocked. What? Patty Jenkins? Like, a woman can make a superhero movie and it can make money? Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
And the irony is as a choice, she made much more sense for a superhero movie than Zack Snyder, because her career is a lot more successful than Zack Snyder's. Like, I mean, it's like, I mean, Patty Jenkins made, you know, Monster, you know, an Oscar caliber movie. You know, Zack Snyder made a movie, you know, that was the equivalent of, you know, being in the back of a garbage truck while it was driving around, that he called Man of Steel. You know, I mean, it's.
If there's a new. Yeah, it's kind of interesting that you mentioned Spider-Man. Like, I'm so tired of it. We've had so many. There needs to be a Miles Morales or nothing.
Yeah.
Miles Morales or nothing.
I agree, yeah.
Like, come on.
Yeah, it's like
misunderstood white suburban teenager. We've had it over and over again. I know that's the story, but we need more.
We do. It's like, I mean, and I feel the same way. I feel like, you know, if you're just going to do the same thing, I don't want them to do it at all. You know,
exactly.
Miles Morales is the only thing that could make me care about that franchise at this point. You know,
they've made me completely apathetic. This is my husband's favorite superhero, and I'm just like, no Spider-Man. I'm done until they do Miles Morales. I'm done. No more money. You don't get. I've paid for too many Spider-Man movies.
I have a feeling we're going to be seeing less releases, and I think that's a good thing. Focus on quality releases where it's offering something new as opposed to just doing shit after shit after shit. Like, do we really need a new Pirates of the Caribbean? Do we need a new Transformers? I mean, I think money is going to shift towards the smaller screen in terms of Netflix and series and things like that. And then in the big screen, you know, less releases. And I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing.
Well, you know, kind of I mean, in terms of the kinds of movies that are being released, I mean, you look at, I mean, like La La Land, you know, obviously, you know, massive hit, about, you know, 200 million, or no, it was like worldwide it was like 400 million or something, you know, 30 million production budget or whatever. But then you look at like a smaller movie like Moonlight, you know, that didn't make nearly as much, but at the same time, compared to what it cost to make, Moonlight did better than most of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. So I think, regardless of the choices studios make, history's being, written with the Moonlights and the La La Lands and the American Hustles and, the movies that punch above their weight, I think that's, those are the movies we're going to be, reading about in film history textbooks, years down the line, not, Avengers 50 billion or whatever.
Regardless of how much money is spent, I think audiences can tell if there's real artistic creativity, integrity, and intention behind it. It's just got that X factor to it. Regardless of how much money was put into it. And like you said, those are the movies that'll make history.
Absolutely.
I also think superheroes in general, I think, have flooded the market, but I think the number one thing, and this connects a bit to what you're saying about superheroes, is the humanity, which is interesting because we've talked a lot about humanity, is we want to see the humanity with kind of the heroics.
Yes,
Superman's not Superman without kryptonite.
Yeah.
So that's lacking in all of these new ones. There's
Absolutely,
not a humanist, or it's whatever Ben Affleck is, moody, I don't know, that's the only humanness I'm seeing, and we're
Grumpy,
losing
cranky,
that.
creepy.
Yeah, and if you look at the original, the first 3 X-Men, there was like real heart and story and connection and, stake in our world. Like it really mirrored problems we were having in society at the time, and what we want from superheroes is that realness, but also that escape. And I feel like the last, horde of movies have been just escape with no human, connection really at all.
I so agree, and I just, since you brought up X-Men, I have to go down that road for a second. One of the main reasons that first X-Men movie is so good is because at its heart it's a movie about a father and a daughter, surrogate father and daughter, but, it's that kind of relationship nonetheless, and, as Bryan Singer, put it, you follow them from a snowy road to the top of the Statue of Liberty. It's a really emotional journey, and that's not in Thor, that's not in Captain America, that's not in the Iron Man sequels. Maybe a little bit in the first one, but that's still not nearly on the X-Men level. So I think, I want to see that kind of humanity upheld, because that's what any good movie should do, regardless of genre.
Final thoughts. Here we are talking about Blade Runner. Just to clarify, if you didn't understand earlier, I really love this film. I give it 4 stars. It made me want to get into this universe even more. It made me want to read Philip K. Dick's original story even more and think about some of these themes that are going on, because I think it really reflects where we are in society and where technology is headed. As you said, everybody in the tech industry is talking about AI right now, and I feel that is the case. And because the way quantum computing is going, it seems like we're very close at hitting that point. This could be the 21st century version of testing the nuclear bomb in the 20th century, and that fucking scares me, because our world is going to change, and we need films like Blade Runner and these universes to think about these on a philosophical level, and legal scholars need to get on this as well. Like, how do we handle the politics of artificial intelligence and all that? But that's my final take on this, and I look forward to seeing the film again.
Yeah, me too. And I think in terms of movies allowing us to think about things, I sometimes wonder what difference does a movie make? What impact does it have? And I'm about to tell a story. It sounds like I'm patting myself on the back. That's not really what I'm just trying to illustrate what effect a movie can have, and it can produce concrete action. I was a mother really freaked me out about global warming. So after I saw the movie, I went and volunteered with Friends of Trees and planted some shrubs in Tigard. So which is why I think it speaks to your point, Patrick. I think we do we need movies for entertainment. We need them to help us process the crazy world we live in. And I think Blade Runner 2049 is both. I think it's entertainment. I think it is philosophical. And I would say it's. I think one thing we've definitely established that we would all agree on is it's not for everybody. As the first film wasn't either. But I would say to people listening, go check it out. Bump that week opening weekend up a little bit because you'll be supporting art.
I guess I would just agree with Ben that it's not for everybody. There were parts I really liked. I'm glad I saw it, especially as a comparison to the original. But it's not really meant to be a comparison, I don't think, to the original. I think if you love the original, you're either going to love or you're going to hate this. There's not really an in-between. But there were a lot of aspects I really enjoyed, and I thought Harrison Ford did a really good job.
Yes.
Kind of bringing back Decker, and I enjoyed many aspects of it, but I wouldn't give it quite 4 stars. But cool beans.
All right. Well, I think that's the perfect note to end on. If you like this podcast, and why wouldn't you, please click thumbs up, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like us on Facebook. As always, don't follow us on Twitter. I haven't updated that in over a year. And please check out all the great reviews and content we have at thomoviereviews.wordpress.com. Once again, I'm Bennett Campbell Ferguson. I'm here with Hanna McGrath-Perdue and Patrick Belin. And from all of us here at T.H.O. Movie Reviews, happy movie watching.